Hi, it's Bobbie from Fifth Avenue Cake Designs, and I thought it would be fun to show you one of my favorite ways of decorating a cake. And it's an old school way of decorating. It's referred to as the Lambeth Method of cake decorating. Joseph Lambeth, who wrote the book Lambeth Method of Cake Decorating, is the one who invented this particular look back in 1934. And he took borders, overpipe those borders. You want at least 5 types of line work over piping on your borders, and added string work, and then piped some leaves or added a little bit of flowers. But he took this very ornate design, these very ornate designs, and put them together to come up with a unique eye-popping cake decorating method. And since it's one of my favorites, I thought I would share to you my version of the Joseph Lambeth method of piping. So I have my cake that I covered about 3 days ago. 2 days is probably the minimum. You want your fondant to be pretty set because you're going to be piping layers upon layers, and you don't want your fondant to be wet and sagging. So make sure that this is one of those things you want to make sure that you have a couple of days, if you're going to go do something else, and then you can come back to the cake. But go ahead and cover your cake ahead of time. This is the beveled edge that I was talking about, and it's covered with my cake. Now the first thing you want to do before you even start piping, because I know it sounds like fun, we're just going to jump in and pipe, and then you're going to be off, and oh no, Bobbie didn't tell me this, so I'm going to make sure I tell you this first. We need to measure. So I have my round up here. I took a parchment paper. We're going to measure this in 2 different ways. I also have a measuring guide down here. But the first thing we want to do is start up here so we have somewhere to begin. And the best thing you can do, or at least I find it the easiest way, is to take just a regular parchment paper round that you use for your cake. You're going to fold it in half, and then you're going to fold it in half again. And then in order to make sure that you do not come out too big, you're going to fold it in thirds so that everything is nice and even and comes out perfect. So everything is lined up and you have a nice point. Then you're going to open it up, and you should have 12 sections, and they should be 1 inch. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take some pins and just lay this down. Now I want to make sure that my center line here is lined up with the center line here. So we should only need about 3 pins, and I'm actually going to turn this upside down since it wants to bounce open the other way. And don't worry about putting the holes in the cake. They're not going to show. We're going to be piping over them. No one will ever see them. Now you can mark your cake with a couple of different things. I normally like to use a little bit of a pin when I'm marking, but so that you can see my marks, I'm going to use a food safe marker, which you are more than welcome to do. It works just fine. I'm just making sure that I'm in line here. Okay, so normally, and you want a dressmaker, if you can get your hands on them, they sell them at Joann's, anywhere, just a dressmaker's tape measure so that you can check your work. So, like I said, normally I would be using pins, but for this I will go ahead, and I'm coming around the top here, so I just don't want to hit this shadow. So you're just going to mark each of these little spaces where you have your fold, and give yourself a little bit of a mark. You don't want it to be too dark. I'm using a green food safe marker. So that it's not too dark, but it's dark enough for you all to see. Alright, now that I've got all my marks on, looks like I forgot one. It's always good to double check. Now that I have all my marks on, what I like to do, and I'm a little bit OCD about this, so if you don't want to do this part, you don't have to, is I will take my dressmaker's tape and make sure that all of my marks are the same distance apart, just so that I know that I have the exact same spacing all the way around. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back and show you the rest. You want to take a ruler and line it up with your bottom. If you have one of these dividing cake mats, that's wonderful. If not, you can eyeball it, but you want to line it up with your dot. Make sure you're exactly in the same place. Now I'm doing this from over, so it's a little bit harder, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So you just want to take it, mark where you might have where you're thinking you're going to put your designs. And you just, the next thing you want to do, and I'm going to show you one more, and then I don't want to bore you to death with measuring, but it is an important part. This, I know that I have 12 sections, so, and my bottom beveled edge is 10 inch, so it's on the 10-inch round section of this mat. They're numbered, so I'm on the number 12. I'm lining up my ruler to my dot, and then that's how we're going to mark it. So it's really important that you stay within these lines when you're working on this, unless you want to go, there's one other way that you can do this, well, there's a couple different ways. You can do your circumference around and figure out where you are, and then measure this way down with a smaller ruler and mark it going all the way down. So that's another way of measuring it, but I wouldn't just nilly-willy guess, because if you're off by a hair, it will be off when you go to pipe. So I will finish marking the cake, and then so we have our cake all measured and ready to go. What I like to do is I'll make myself a little cheat sheet of how I'm going to do it, because when you're piping Lambeth, you're a little bit ADD, but not really, because you're going to start one place, go to another place, come back. So you're not going to always be in the same place. And this keeps me kind of in an area where I can understand what I'm going to be doing, so I don't forget, because I don't always have another cake to look at to make sure that I'm okay. The other thing you might want to do is print yourself out a 1-inch grid sheet and practice piping in that 1-inch grid sheet, because the puffs are going to be about 1 inch, depending on the size of your top tier. It might be bigger than one, a little bit bigger, or it might be a little bit smaller. But if you practice a couple of times, you'll be able to stay in that 1 inch. Now, to start piping the cake, you only need a couple of things. You want a lightly dampened cloth so that you can keep things nice and clean, a cup of water in case you need to clean up a little bit or scrape something away. You'll need a small spatula to scrape. And then I like to cover my tips with a tip cover. I know a lot of people sometimes will put their tips under a wet cloth. I find this to be a little bit easier to work with and to keep everything tidy. And then you'll want an artist brush, and I usually have 2 sizes, one for my strings and one for my puffs. And that's about it, and several different size tips. So today we're going to start with making some very large puffs. And we're using a 199 tip. We're going to start about 3/4, a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch inside, and we want to stay inside. I'm trying to see where they are here. Our 2 dots that we made, the 2 green dots, or if you are working with a pinhole, you want to stay inside that. It's very important that you come out the same size each time. So you want to start your puff by having your tip at a 90-degree angle, bringing puff, 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 puff. As you get to about the size that you want, start easing off the pressure a little and turn that tip until you get to about right here. And once you're at about 3 o'clock, turn and ease off. You want your puffs to touch one another. So again, puff, 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 puff. I like to see when it starts to touch, and you want to turn, come down, and ease off. You want to leave enough space that you can put in your zigzag border. So we're going to just keep doing that. And this one seems to have come out too far, so I'm going to show you what you do if that happens. You cover your tip so that your icing doesn't dry out. And you gently just scrape it away, hoping not to get it on your table. I have a little bit of a tail that I did on this puff, so I'm just going to tuck him in nice and neat. No harm, no foul. So I scraped it away, you can't even tell. And as you can see, you just want to make sure those puffs stay the exact same size and the height and the width are the same. If it helps for you to make a mark about 3/4 in to a 1/2 inch in, wherever you decide you want your puff to be, go ahead and do so. The most important thing is that all your puffs come out even, in the same height and the same distance. And that they're touching so that you don't have any air when you go to do the overpiping. So you're starting, like I said, straight up. You're going to ease the pressure just a little bit. You're not going to come done pushing pressure until you get to about 3 o'clock. And you're going to ease right on off. Have a nice round puff. And every so, I would say 2 to 3, I would check your puffs. Make sure that they're about that they are the same size, not about the same size, and height. The last thing you want to do is get to the very end of your cake and find out that you have 4 puffs that just didn't make the grade. This last one, you want to tuck him in. And if he gives you a little bit of problems, you can take your damp brush, but it looks like he's okay. Oops, that's my scriber. We don't want to take that. And just tuck in his tail, but he seems to be just fine. So I'm going to get my bag ready for string work, and I'll meet you back here. So I have a piece of register tape here that I'm putting on my cake, and I'm covering it with a little piece of masking tape. I should be able to move it up and down, which I am. I might have to tighten this just a tad. This is going to help me for the lengths of my strings so that I know that each one of my strings will come out the same length. So I'm going to check the front and make sure that everything is the same. And you can get register tape at Office Depot. Just trying to figure out how long I want those strings to come in, because I'm going to be putting 2 sets of strings on, one longer than the other. So I think that should be just about right. And rather than count on my eye telling me, that's about 1 3/4 from the top. I'm just randomly picking spaces on the cake to make sure we come out the same. 1 3/4 there. Now we're 1 3/4 there. Now you can cut notches in there, fold it, over so that you have 12 folds and you cut notches in there. I'm not planning to get that close to my register tape, so I'm not going to worry about cutting any notches in. And I'm going to start with I'm going to start in the back of the cake. And I know it's the back of the cake because my ribbons ended. And we're going to be making our drop strings from here to here. And I will start with my longest string. I'm making a connection. You want to keep your pressure even. Allow gravity to do all the work for you. And hopefully there isn't anybody jiggling your table like someone just did right now to me. Keep that pressure even until you get the length that you want. And then start releasing pressure when you get up to the top. You should have a pretty nice even string. Okay, so I'm going to put my second string in here. And you can do whatever you want for your strings. Joseph Lambeth had several different patterns he did with string work, some more elaborate than others. And I am going to do anywhere from 3 to 5 strings in here. I'm going to see how this looks when I get the third one on. You want to release your pressure. So you're having constant pressure, you're pulling out. You're not drawing your string, you're allowing gravity to do that for you. And when your string is the length that you want, ease off the pressure, but do not stop pressure, you'll break your string until you get to the top and then completely ease off. So I think I'll do 5. So again, I'm allowing gravity to do the work for me. And remember, however slow or fast that you pipe, that's how you want to keep your pressure. So if you're piping quite slowly, then you want to keep your pressure at that same speed. If you're piping fast, then your pressure needs to match how you're piping, or you'll end up coming out uneven and breaking a lot of strings. So make that connection, and don't worry about those strings, the top of the strings showing. We're going to cover those when we do the next section, so no one will see the connection of the string. So I'm making my string length, and then I'm coming up to the top. And he's a little uneven, so I'm going to take him off. I like to keep my center in front of me. So you're making your pressure constant. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Let your string drop to where you want it to be. Ease up on your pressure. And come up to the top and release. So make your connection to the top. You want to make them right next to each other, not on top of each other, but next to each other. We're not over piping these strings. And really let gravity do the work for you. Don't fight with gravity. Keep your tip clean at all times. If you notice that your icing has an air bubble, take the string off right away because more than likely it's going to break on you anyway, and it's better if you remove it than you try and make it work. Also, if your icing starts to look a little bit airy, take it out of the bag, whip it up, and start again. By having it in a parchment cone, it does allow you to have more time. It doesn't break down as fast as it does in your plastic cones or in your plastic disposable bags. I prefer parchment cones pretty much to anything. But when you're piping the big puffs in Lambeth, it's harder to use those parchment cones. So you could have, or if you wanted to, you could overlink each string. I'm going to go back and when I say overlink, I'll show you what I'm talking about when we get there. But you can do any string design that your hearts desire. That's the neat thing about Lambeth, that it's all your idea. You don't have to follow, and that one didn't come up as high as I wanted it to. You don't have to follow anybody's idea. You don't have to follow my design. You can get your ideas from looking at other cakes, looking at different borders, or different string work if you're working on the strings. The important thing is just to have fun and keep piping. Another thing I want to mention, I notice a lot of times when I am finished piping, I feel it in my hand. It's important when you're doing this work to remember that your hands are your most important tool that you have. So take care of them. Don't overfill your bag more than's comfortable for your hand. Make sure that your consistency is comfortable for you. So if it's and I didn't say the puffs are off-peak consistencies. But make sure that that off-peak consistency is a comfortable off-peak for you. Yes, you want it to be off-peak, but you don't want it to be so hard that you're fighting with your royal icing. And if I'm getting quiet, sometimes I have a tendency to hold my breath while I am piping. It's hard to talk while you're holding your breath. It also isn't a very good idea to pipe while you're holding your breath. Let's see if I can bring him up. I noticed that he wasn't up all the way. I don't want him to fall down. And I'm going to just tap him in a little bit. So if they're not exactly perfect, you can dampen your brush. If they're completely off, you should move them and start over. If they're not attaching to your cake. The last thing you want to do is, if you're making this for somebody or an event or a competition, is get it into your box and find that you have broken quite a few designs or strings. That would be sad. So I'm going to continue to do this all around the cake. I'll show you one more, and then we will come back when I go to do the second part of these strings. So I'm going down, keeping constant pressure until I get to the length that I want, easing on the pressure but not releasing, bringing up the other part of my string and attaching it. So I'll see you when I finish. So now I'm going to make my overlap strings, and I'm only going to do 3 here. So I'm going to start the dot right here. And if you made a pinhole, then it will be your pinhole. And these are not going to be quite as long, so I did remove my register tape. I'm going to use my string as my guide. And we're bringing it right across to the other mark. And the same thing applies here. You want to allow gravity to do the work. You don't want to draw that string in. You're just, in a sense, moving the tip from one side to the other. And you're going to start releasing pressure when you get to the length that you want and completely release on the top. One of the things I'll say to myself to keep myself a little bit calmer when I'm doing this, because we all tend to get a little panicky when we're making those overlapping strings, is it's literally just sugar. It can be fixed. If you don't put so much pressure on yourself, and that's a huge thing for me to say. Anyone who knows me is probably laughing at the moment. But if you don't put a ton of pressure on yourself, you're going to find that you do 10 times better. And don't fight, in this sense, gravity. There is a part of the cake that I'm working on that gravity is going to kind of be my enemy. But I'm going to show you how we can defy gravity a little bit and make it work for what we want. But when you're piping your strings or your swags, let gravity do the work. I know a lot of people, I'm going to fix that one right there just a hair. I'm going to show you what to do if you have one that you just think is a little bit off. Just take your damp brush. Your damp brush can be your best friend when you're doing this type of work. I know a lot of times when I describe Lambeth cakes to people, they ask me, why would you want to take that kind of time to do that kind of a cake? Well, number one, it has an amazing presence. Number two, it helps your piping. There's no way that you could go through an entire cake of doing Lambeth and not become a better piper in the process. And number three, this is not the type of cake that you're going to be doing for every single client or for everyone in your family's birthday or whoever you're going to do it for. It's something that's extremely special. And because it is such an old school way of decorating, it's important to keep it alive at the same time to modernize it. If you find an opportunity to pick up one of Joseph Lambeth's books, just take advantage of it and grab it. They're so hard to come by. I lucked out last year. I had been looking, I wanted a first edition, and I had been looking for a long time, and finally just kind of gave up. And when I gave up, I couldn't even find, I think the last time it was published was sometime in 1960, but I couldn't even find one of those editions. And for my birthday, both my husband and my daughter found me a first edition. So I now have two. And I have been asked to sell one, but how do I sell something that was given to me by my husband or my daughter? So I figure if my daughter has two children, they'll each get a book. Alright, I'm going to continue to pipe in these overlapping strings because I think you have a good grasp of what I'm doing and how I'm allowing gravity to work with me. The biggest thing to remember is to start easing off your pressure when you get that string to the length that you want, and then completely ease off when you get to the top. So I'll see you as soon as I finish. Before I do the next section, which is we're going to do a C-scroll over our puffs and a zigzag shelf, I want to tell you that to do the strings, you want to use a rub down method to get any air bubbles out before you put it in your bag. I forgot to tell you that. I'm going to be using two different tips. I have a number 18 and a number 16. I'll be using the 16 first. And I'm going to do a C scroll. So I'm going to come around the back of my puff. And I want to drag. I don't want to lift up too high because I don't want any air. I want to drag my icing and again, I'm not using my turntable because it started it started turning the table on me when I didn't want it to. So I'm just going to manually turn my cake. You want to make sure your bag is tight and that your tip is clean. So you're going to make your C scroll going around, keeping, once you make that turn, you want to keep your tip low and drag it around your puff. Almost touching it, but not quite. And I would check after, depending on what climate you live in. I'm in Colorado, so my royal icing tends to dry fast, and I can see that I lost a little bit right here, so I just want to fix him with a damp brush. Okay. And check for any air. When my daughter and I work together, she checks. When I'm piping, she'll check for air, and when she's piping, I will check for air. So when I make my C scroll, I'm higher, and when I come down and around the front and the back of my puff, I'm almost dragging. I'm getting as close as I can so that I don't have any air and I release pressure as I get to the end. So let me show you that one more time since I did not explain the pressure control here. I'm going to start with pressure, build my C curl up, bring the icing around the puff with constant even pressure, come back around the side of this puff and start releasing pressure when you get right here. So I will finish these up and I'll see you when we go make our shot. So I've changed my tip. I now have a number 18 in. And I'm just going to be doing a zigzag scallop. And I call it on a shelf because it's up on the top here, but it's actually a border. So I'm going to stick my tip right in between those two. And then I'm going to scallop and zigzag and come out. I'm going to do it again, and that's all you're going to do for this guy is just zigzag and scallop down. So you're going to make a little bit more pressure when you're coming down. So you're going to start with your tip right here. And you're just going to move back and forth, a little bit more pressure when you're scalloping and coming back up. So I'll finish these and I'll see you for the next section. Okay, now that we have our zigzag scallop on, we're going to just go over it with a straight line. So we're going to go right here and we're going to bring a line across and in. And you're going to want to be a little bit careful because, as you noticed, my little C scroll moved. So just be genteel. You don't want to see any air. Make sure you're piping right up at, oh, that one didn't turn out. So let's get him off. We should be just dry enough that I can get him off without damaging underneath. be able to kind of scrape him off. There we go. And then use your brush to bring him down. I'm a little bit of a disadvantage on this part of the cake because I'm short, and when I stand I'm too tall, and when I sit I'm too short. So I'm on my knees, which I would not suggest anybody do. To release pressure when you get in there, make sure when you go back, that you start your line where you stopped it so that no one can tell. Don't want any bumps or anything. You want it to look like a continual line. Now if you want to, you could just go all the way across, but I'm showing you. So I'm going to stop at each curve so you know what to do. And release your pressure. So now we have 2 layers, and we know we're going to have at least 5 layers up here, so that this part definitely will be our Lambeth piping. So you're just coming around, and this is going to make it easier when you do the overpiping the next part. So let me clean up and I'll see you back here in a few. And now that we've had a little bit of break and it's time to exercise our hands, we're going to finish the overpiping. I'm going to start with a tip number 4 with my rub down consistency icing. I'm going to overpipe the C-scroll and then the border. So we're going to, on this we are not going to drag. We're going to lift up. We're going to stay in our grooves to give a nice, smooth overpipe look on the outside of our C-scrolls. And you're just following the pattern that you've already made. Now because the inside of your C-scroll is the type of pattern that it is, it will be a little bit higher than everything else, and that's okay. Alright, I just realized I did not tell you anything about pressure, so let me do that. So we're going to start with some pressure. We're going to keep that even pressure as we go around. You want to keep your tip lifted up so that you can get a nice round look. No sharp edges. And you're just going to follow your line with your pressure, your even pressure. And it might help you if you're not used to working with this type of pressure to practice on a board first. I have quite a few practice boards I do, and then you're going to release your pressure at the end of your C-scroll and come down. If you see something, as I do right now, you can take a little bit of a damp brush, flatten it out. And for this, I'm using an artist brush. I normally use a smaller 5-0 brush, but because of the type of piping that we're doing, we need a little bit bigger of a brush. I also write the number that I'm using on my tip. That way if I accidentally grab the wrong tip as you go down smaller, it can be sometimes a little bit difficult, especially when you get down to like a 1, a 0, and a 00 without piping out a line to see. I'm going to turn this a little. As I turn it, I am not using any pressure at all. I'm just holding that line in place. But the last thing you want to do is have to stop what you're working on to make sure that you have the right tip. So take a few minutes and just label your parchment cones. And again, when I am working with any type of line work, I do prefer the parchment cones. I feel like I have more control. And as I said, the icing will not break down as fast as it will in a disposable bag. Your featherweight bags will give you a little bit longevity as well. But I have such small hands that sometimes I have trouble getting the pressure out in those featherweight bags and being able to feel it. So I prefer the parchment cones. Remember to release when you're coming down. If you don't, you will continue on and you will ruin your design. Well, you won't really ruin it because there's always a way to fix something, but you'll be doing a lot of fixing work. Whenever I'm filling up any bag, whether it is a disposable or a parchment bag, I try and leave that top as clean as possible so that I don't have to start over with a new bag. That's time consuming. If you have a pastry scraper, you can use that to push your icing down. And then always remember to use a spatula and your thumb to get that icing in. When you are fixing anything, or if there's something that you don't like, you always, ooh, I just dented him, so I'm going to fix him. I just did what I was about to tell you not to do. You want to go to the side, in the inside or the outside. You don't want to go on the top. You don't want to squash what you've done. If you stay in the open grooves that you have piped, you will find that your line will lay easier and there'll be less chance for space and air to get in. The key to Lambeth is that everything is tight and that it all looks like one flowing design. So again, I'm making even pressure. I'm creating even pressure. I'm bringing it around that C-scroll. I'm laying on the outside of my design, of my C-scroll, and bringing it around, releasing the pressure and easing off completely. Now I don't like this particular curvature, so I'm going to fix it with my brush. And I can see I have a little bit of air. And every couple I usually check it because, like I said, I live in a very dry climate, so my icing dries faster than if I was in Illinois, where I'm originally from. It took a little while to get used to the altitude and the dryness of Denver, but I wouldn't live anywhere else. I love it here. Okay. So I'm going to continue these and I'll come back when we do number 3. Okay, so we have the overpiping of the number 4 on the C-scrolls. Now we're going to do our ruffle border. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start here. And we're going to follow that same groove that we made on the outside and bring it in and release pressure. Be careful because the previous number 4 that you just piped is still fairly wet and you wouldn't want to hurt it. Don't worry too much about the joining inside here. We're going to pipe a leaf for the inside, so you will have something hiding the connection. I do like to take a wet brush sometimes though and make it look like it is one continuous line. So I'll do one more and then I will take it all the way around with the number 4 and we will come back and do the 3 on both the C-scroll and the outside border. Release pressure inside. I have no pressure going, but he won't release. So I'm going to bring him out just a tad. There we go. Sometimes you'll get stuck in there and it's not worth hurting this little guy on top. Okay, so I'll see you in just a minute. Alright, so now we've made it all the way around and we're going to overpipe with our number 3, which I have labeled. We're going to start with pressure. We're going to hold our tip high enough to get a beautiful curve. And again, we're going to be piping more towards the outside of that number 4 line now. And you want to always stay towards the outside of your line. So we're going to bring him nicely around. And release pressure as we come back. And by now you should be able to see some of that building we have on, this will be our 4th layer. And because we have been together for quite some time now, I have decided to only take this to 5 layers high. I've enjoyed being with you. I'm sure you're getting a little bored with me. So I want to teach you enough so that you can be excited with piping and start piping, but not so much that you're like that guy in Airplane with that woman, or when he kept telling a story and people were offing themselves. And like I said, depending on your climate, 2 or 3 over pipings, or over, in this case, the puffs that were over piping, you want to check. Make sure you don't have any air showing, or that your scrolls are not beautiful and rounded, no elbows, as I like to call them. Release pressure as you come towards the back. And if you need to, just take your brush and bring that back one in. This will be the last one I do with the number 3 till we come back and do the zigzag border. So as you can see, I'm having constant pressure. I have my tip lifted high enough that it gives me the control that I need to get the curve that I want and to follow my lines. And release as you come towards the back. So I'll see you when I do the zigzag. So now we're going to take our number 3 over our scalloped border. We're going to work towards the back. I have my tip raised, and I will bring it down as I release pressure. I will connect again. And generally after you lay that first over piped line of number 4 or 3 or whatever you choose, it gets a little easier. You can see your pattern. You're not working over scallop edges. If for some reason, and I've always said if the phone rings, let it ring, or the doorbell goes, let it go, but that's not life. If for some reason something happens while you're in the middle of this, go ahead and put a little marking of your icing somewhere of where you've stopped, so you can pick up once whatever's going on has stopped. So again, I'm lifting up. I have pressure, even pressure, and I'm releasing as I come down to that inside edge. And as I said, if your inside edge isn't totally perfect, you're going to be piping a leaf or putting a flower or a bead in there. I would still smooth it out with your damp brush. There's no reason to sit there and worry about it too much. Nobody's going to really see it. So I'll do one more. Use pressure. And remember that everything is crusted over, but it is still wet, so be gentle. And I'll see you back with the number 2. Alright, so we're going to put our final layer on, because I'm only going to a number 5 if you want to go, or 5 layers. So this is my number 2 seamless piping tip. I don't like the way he's beginning, so I'm just going to take him off. We're going to make our connection. Pressure, lift up. Go towards the back of your number 3 previously piped C-scroll. Keep your pressure constant as you bring him around. Oh, he has an air bubble. Alright, so we're not going to sweat it, because watch, I'm going to show you how easily he can come up. And that normally doesn't happen, but we should still be able to get him up. Okay, and then I saw a piece of him come down here, so I'm just going to get that really easily. Okay, so if you have an air bubble, usually I'm pretty good at checking to make sure that I don't have any air bubbles, especially in a piping tip this small, because I have done a rub down consistency, but it does happen. That is what you will have. It will make that pop, and depending on how big that air bubble is and how small your piping tip is, it will just go away on you. But as you can see, it was extremely easy to fix. I think that took all of 5 seconds, and we're back in business. So just stay calm. Remember, everything is fixable. And come towards the back, ease off your pressure, and touch down. And continue to do that. Now, if you would like to go, you can go as many layers as you want. The cool thing about Lambeth is that there is no such thing as overdoing it. So you can keep piping and over piping to your heart's content. And you'll just have an extremely ornately decorated cake. But for this purpose, like I said, I'm only going to take it to the 5 layers that he required. The cake that I opened with had 6 layers on it. Now you have a couple of choices. That you could go down to a number 1 seamless tip. You could go down to a 1.5, or if you wanted to, you could do another overpiping of the number 2 and then go down to a 1 or a 1.5. Now if you're going to go to those half marks, which are nice to work with because they take you slowly down to the smaller piping tips, those are PMEs, and as far as I know, they're the only ones who make them in the halves. So I'll do one more, and then I'll come back when we do the outside edge. I just want to check it. Like I said, you want to check every couple ones. I'm sure my head's getting in the way as I'm checking it. My gigantic bun. So again, you want to make your connection, make your curve, keep even pressure, bring your C curve around, and you will notice most things are C's or S's, reverse C's and reverse S's. And if you start looking at things like bedspreads, my fireplace has scroll work on it and release pressure. Excuse me, I want to just let you know we're going to release pressure right there. You will see lots of things have C's and S's in it that you wouldn't normally know. And I get a lot of inspiration from just my everyday household items. I think I did a cookie that had the same pattern as my front door. Alright, I'll see you back here in just a minute. I'm not sure if I mentioned I am starting on the back of the cake each time I start. So now we've done all of our overpiping for our puffs and C-scrolls. So let's go ahead and finish our scallop border. We're going to start with a little bit of pressure, not a lot. And then we're going to keep our tip raised so we can get a beautiful curve for that scalloped edge. Working on the back part of the number 3 that we previously piped, and release pressure as we come in. If you want, you can just continually keep going. I find sometimes, especially when I'm working with the number 2, it'll get a little bulky in there. So I do like to stop. Again, I'm going to have no pressure as I turn my turntable. If I had kept piping or kept pressure on, the icing would have gone wherever it wanted to, and that's not what I want. So about every 1 or 2, check that there's no space, and then continue on. So we make our connection. We're going to keep our pressure constant as we make that beautiful curve and drop as we come in. Now if this is your first introduction to Lambeth, you might, like I said, want to practice on a cake board, or you can practice on a dummy cake. If you wanted to, you could cover it with maybe some older fondant that you're not going to use. It won't matter if your fondant is a little bit wrinkled because number 1, it's your practice cake. Number 2, you're going to be putting so much piping on there that it wouldn't be seen. Or if you're more comfortable not wasting fondant, you can take your cake board and prop it up with those pillars, in between those two pillars, and pipe it so that you are piping on the side, so you can see what it is like to pipe on the side and on the top of a cake. So I'll do one more for you, and then I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more. So you see I make my connection, and I can see that my connection has a little bit of a bump, so I'm going to show you what to do if that happens. I'm keeping my tip to the outside, perpendicular with my number 3. I release pressure and touch down. So I have a tiny little bump right in the center there. Like I said, I'm going to be piping a little leaf in there, but I still would like to have it smooth. So I just take a damp brush to the side. Never on the top, because you will dent in that beautiful over piping. Whereas I just did take it with you. There we go. So we have our connection, and that's great. Alright, I will see you in just a few minutes. Okay, so I'm finishing up that last number 2. I have a tiny bit of a connection peak, so I'm just going to take a little bit of water. Right. So I hope I've given you a better understanding of Lambeth with the 5 overpiping ornate borders and the line work. And I am going to finish this cake. If you would like to join me and see how I finish the cake, I would love that. Just go visit me at 5th Avenue Cake Designs and follow the link. I hope you've learned a lot with me this last hour. Thank you.